The most common relationship among living beings is that of predator and prey. But it's not the only one. There are non-violent relationships, and many more that we could consider to be cooperative and beneficial for both sides. There are dealings among family members, neighbors, and even among strangers. Animals from different species sometimes stay together all their lives. Amazing connections between the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the world of fungi can produce very intense and deep links. Nonetheless, friendship in the wild is always self-serving. Food, free transportation, or protection are the means of exchange among living beings, the things that make them friends for life. A thirsty hedgehog comes to his usual pond. He's not foraging for food right now. He knows that there's nothing for him to eat around here. Yet. He'll have to wait a bit for colder weather to make the frog sluggish. And then he'll leave no stone unturned to look for them. Summer is drawing to an end, but the weather's still quite hot. These frogs are making the most of the last strong rays of sunlight, but sunbathing like this makes them vulnerable. So they're very aware of any danger that might appear within their short field of vision. They're colored like the ground, and it's not easy to spot them. So they put a lot of trust in their camouflage. Until some threat, in this case the hedgehog, comes too close. The first frog to get nervous, normally the one closest to the predator, jumps. It heads for the water, where it feels safe. With one long jump, a frog can cover a distance that's more than 30 times its own body length. That's far enough to dodge most frog hunters. As it pushes off, it releases the water that it was accumulating in its body so as not to get dehydrated while sunbathing. What's curious about this method is that it has an effect that we might describe as cooperative among the colony of frogs. Frogs don't see very well. They mostly detect movement, quick or slow, large or small objects. And a large object moving above a certain speed sets off its escape mechanism. So when a frog soars through the air, it becomes visible to all the others and sets off an alarm that the rest of its pond companions obey, even though they haven't actually seen the enemy. Cooperation with one's genetic fellows is very valuable as an evolutionary trait. This nest seems a real architectural beauty. Its design is focused on completely integrating it into the landscape. That's the latest trend. But the exquisiteness of its finish, its materials, its simplicity, its minimalism, are not motivated by aesthetic or mimetic reasons. This nest is intended to look like a natural outgrowth from the tree trunk on which it was built. Inside, a living treasure that can exceed a dozen chicks, which are taking turns at the door to receive food, is trying to survive as fast as it can and yet go unnoticed. They only draw attention to themselves when their mother or father approaches with something to eat. With a beak full of insects. The mother, the father, and sometimes even a friend work together to feed all those children. It has been observed among many bird species that on occasions young birds that don't yet have a mate join the stable pairs to contribute to the success of the brood. It's believed that these helpers may be the young offspring from the previous year's brood, who, having not found a mate yet, prefer to provide food for their little siblings or step-siblings. But this behavior isn't entirely disinterested. Besides supporting their own genetic lineage, they gain experience for when it's their turn to reproduce. Many birds group together to raise their chicks, like seagulls, whose colonies can number into the hundreds of thousands. Vultures come together as they soar on the air currents to look for food. In this way, they manage to survey the land in detail for hundreds of kilometers around. No corpse will go unnoticed. Migratory birds tend to form flocks when they hit the road. Flying in formation reduces the friction between the air and their bodies by almost a third, saving energy. The number of birds in the flock also improves the route, as their combined experience produces the shortest and safest path. There are many ways for the members of the same species to collaborate. But grouping together in flocks or herds brings the greatest advantages. The gregariousness of gnus is due in part to their all looking for the best grazing lands. But they travel together mostly because surrounding themselves with others is a lot safer. Together, they can spend more time eating than watching their surroundings for signs of lions. As long as one of them is standing watch, the rest around him are protected. The more gnus join the group, the more time they can each spend grazing without having to do guard duty. In this immense multitude, each gnu only has to lift its head every once in a while. In addition, the level of stress in the herd also drops, and that's good for the herd's health. Also, obviously, the more animals in the group, the lower the probability that any one individual will be chosen to be a predator's lunch. Forming herds has proven to be such an efficient solution that there are even mixed herds with different species in them. And this improves the herd members' safety and feeding efficiency even more. Zebras and gnus have taken the first steps toward the concept of symbiosis. Species that act jointly to mutual benefit. Technically, this collaboration among different species is called mutualism because it refers more to an isolated or occasional action than a lifelong association. Mutualism is clearly observed in the way oxpeckers remove parasites from their hosts. In exchange for food, that is, for some horseflies, ticks, and sometimes even a little blood from a wound, oxpeckers remove the parasites from their hosts' hides. It's not a perfect service because no one could eliminate that many tiny parasites, but at least they relieve them of a large share of them. This isn't just a sanitary service that makes the hosts more comfortable. The oxpecker's work is very important to limiting the development and spreading of serious illnesses. But true symbiosis is a permanent relationship. It takes place between two species that share a life in common. And both species benefit from their association. In a symbiotic relationship, the two beings involved often can't survive without each other. Jellyfish are very primitive animals. They date from the time when life began in the sea, more than 500 million years ago, in the Cambrian period. And even in that remote time, symbiosis already existed. Some jellyfish coexist with symbiotic bacteria inside them. Many living beings do this, especially in order to be able to digest certain foods at a molecular level. But there is an alliance between jellyfish and bacteria that is even more complex. In the forests of their tentacles, some jellyfish grow gardens, green gardens of cyanobacteria. That is, a kind of plant-like sea bacteria that take the energy of the sun and turn it into living energy, into organic food. This kind of jellyfish tends to swim upside down in order to help its bacteria carry out their photosynthesis. And some even settle on the bottom in shallow waters, as close as possible to the surface, so as to provide their garden with the maximum light. In this way, the bacteria process more sunlight, and the jellyfish receives more food too. almost as old as the alliance between bacteria and animals is the symbiosis between fungi and plants. These two very different kingdoms are involved in the most widespread and important symbiotic relationship on the planet. It takes place in every ecosystem, from the Arctic to the Antarctic, on land and underwater. And it is a fundamental symbiotic relationship because it positively affects all living beings. Mushrooms are much more than what they look like at first glance. When in autumn or the rainiest seasons, they spread their curious caps over the ground. What emerges on the surface is only the reproductive apparatus of each species. Buried underground is an intricate hidden network formed by extremely fine threads, known as hyphae, which form the body, the essential and stable part of each mushroom. The hyphae of mushrooms tie themselves and link themselves to the roots of most plants and trees. This underground, almost invisible union is beneficial to both the mushroom and the plant, improving their metabolism and their ability to absorb water or nutrients. The salts and minerals present in inorganic molecules that form part of the soil are dead matter, which, thanks to this association with the mushrooms, passes through the plant's roots to become living matter, forming the plant cells that the rest of us animals eat. From the grasses to the large trees in the world's forests, the plants that feed and support the biodiversity of life maintain a crucial contract with mushrooms. The contract stipulates that each new spore from a mushroom will fly away in search of a place where it can start anew. The genetic code written into the spores orders them to form new hyphae, and when they fall, wherever they fall, they will look for plant roots to keep everything in order and in balance underground. The plant kingdom has evolved in parallel to the fungi to eat and drink, and has co-evolved with insects to reproduce. Some adaptations are more general and make it possible for many species of insects to pollinate many different types of flowers. The fuzz that covers these flying insects is a good system to transport many types of pollen, no matter which stamen it's collected from. Insects play a crucial role in the sexual reproduction of plants, but this involves a cost. Many insects eat plants and occasionally threaten their survival. Aphids don't pollinate plants, and they don't eat in the flowers, but on the stalks, where they suck the plant's sap. Curiously, aphids don't defend themselves. They have nothing to ward off potential predators. No stingers, no poison. They're not even agile. And aphids have designed an incomparable strategic weapon. They have a powerful army of mercenaries. Aphids produce a waste substance that's very rich in sugars, like a sort of molasses. It's extraordinarily nutritious and sweet, which is why ants love it. So much so that it's the most important part of the diet of many ant species. When an ant finds an aphid full of liquid, the ant approaches it from behind and subtly stimulates it, touching it with its antennae. Then the aphid, which is fixed to the plant, sucking sap non-stop, offers the ant the sugary liquid that it has produced. Evolution has created an amazing symbiotic relationship. The ants benefit from the aphid's nectar, and in exchange, they have established with them a very close relationship that includes protecting them from the aphid's predators and watching after the plant that feeds them. In the end, it's really an alliance among three species. The plant feeds the aphids, and in exchange is indirectly protected by the ants, which in payment for their services receive a delicious food, thanks to the aphids and the plant that feeds them. Nevertheless, it's a delicate symbiosis. As in any company, balance has to be kept among the members that form it, or the whole business will collapse. If there were too many aphids, the plant would dry up. And if there were too many ants, they would exhaust the aphids. That's why this symbiotic relationship follows a very strict protocol. An ant doesn't just reach the supply station and try to eat whatever it feels like, milking the first aphid it comes across. If that happens, the aphid doesn't react and refuses to give it its precious nectar. Only certain ants control and dole out the supply. Only they know how to stimulate their flock and make them produce. And then they distribute the stuff. With an ant-to-ant kiss. No doubt, this way they prevent ants from other anthills from consuming their resources. In this next symbiosis, the ants not only obtain food, they offer their protection simply in exchange for housing. They live safely inside the branches and trunks of these trees, without having to spend time and energy digging an anthill. In this way, the tree known locally as the novateru, or novice tree, is protected by a very powerful defense system. A species of stinging ant, also known here as novatera ants. The ants are armed with a venom that has a faster and more efficient effect than any plant toxin. And this association has enabled the novatero trees and novatera ants to spread throughout Brazil's Mato Grosso region. Wherever there's a novatero tree, there are novatera ants. And that's why it's called a novice tree, because only someone unfamiliar with the tree and its aggressive residents would go near it. If anything tries to eat the tree's leaves or even touches it, it's attacked by a furious and powerful army. The sting of this species of ant is very painful. Your skin feels like it's on fire. And if several of the ants inject their venom at the same time, they can even kill an animal the size of, for example, a monkey. The leaves of plants often have toxins to limit who can eat them. Plus, the walls of plant cells are made of cellulose. That's why this omnivorous monkey is now looking for ants among the leaves and not eating the leaves themselves, even though he's hungry. He doesn't want vegetables. He needs animal proteins that are going to give him more energy fast. Nevertheless, the diet he seeks is very dangerous. He's in a novatero tree. But this robust Capuchin monkey is no novice and is looking precisely for novatera ants because he knows how to do it without running risks. He knows how to disarm the symbiosis between ant and tree. Nobody can approach a novatero tree unless the weather is cold. And in the Pantanal wetlands of Brazil, in the heart of the tropics, the climate is warm and it's almost never cold. Although in the months of July and August, for only a few days, sometimes for an hour before and after dawn, the minimum temperature may not reach 7 degrees Celsius. And the ants here are practically incapacitated, unable to move or defend themselves at that temperature. The Capuchin monkey is aware that today is one of those rare days. Scraping the branches, splitting them open, he can have a very special breakfast. But as soon as the temperature rises, the ants will go back on the attack. They'll find their way into his fur and sting him, throwing him out of their home in the ant tree, another of this tree's common names. These protective alliances between trees and ants are very effective. And we can also find them in Africa, Eurasia, and Australia. As we've seen, Ants are experts in symbiosis. They form partnerships with aphids, pollinate plants, and protect trees. And they also farm fungi. Leafcutter ants work exclusively for a fungus that they cultivate in their colony as food. All this work cutting, shredding, and transporting leaves is for this fungus. But not just any trees will do to feed their fungus. The nutrients that it needs to grow are only synthesized by certain plant species. The leafcutters even have to carefully select what they collect so that the leaves have the least possible concentration of toxic substances, so as not to poison their fungus crop. That's why it's not strange to see them working at different times of day and night, whenever it has to be done. What's more, the fungus is very demanding. It can't stand the light, and it's very susceptible to changes in temperature or in the concentration of carbon dioxide. Too much plant matter entering the ant nest could kill it. So when it's not too hot, like right now, the leafcutter ants work in the daytime, when the leaves are warmer from the sunlight, and so raise the temperature inside the nest. The fungus likes warmth, but not too much. A complex system of tunnels keeps the colony properly aerated so that the temperature and humidity are just right. Not too much, nor too little, and always constant. This complex symbiosis depends on many factors that are quite delicate. And that's why the ant colony keeps several fungus crops growing underground in different chambers. That's how they ensure that if they lose one crop, another one will always survive. You might think that this fungus doesn't get anything from the ants in return, that it's just their food. But it exists simply because they take care of it. Another example of protective symbiosis occurs under the sea. It's the symbiosis between clownfish and sea anemones. In their tentacles, anemones have thousands of tiny stinging harpoons that work as a defensive barrier so that no fish can touch them. Coming into contact with them can be fatal, since some anemones are highly poisonous. Any other fish that did this would be stung with 1,000 little darts and would die after such a massive injection of toxins. So why doesn't it affect the clownfish? Is it immune to the venom? Are its scales especially thick? No. Anemones don't attack clownfish because they don't detect them. They don't realize that they're there. Before taking up residence in an anemone, clownfish rub their scales lightly against the anemone's tentacles several times. No doubt that hurts, but they do it very carefully. The fish's body chemically analyzes its future partner and then adapts the mucus that covers its scales to perfectly imitate the film that covers the anemone's tentacles. Then the anemone accepts the fish as a part of itself, without realizing it, of course. But it's not a form of commensalism as you might think. In exchange for a safe place to live, the clownfish takes care of and cleans the anemone, and often even gobbles up any leftover table scraps. Certain hermit crabs also establish mutually beneficial contracts with anemones, specifically with actinias, since this genus of anemones can tolerate spending a certain period of time out of water. The actinias hitch a ride on the crab without knowing where it's going, but they don't really care. They're just happy to receive the bits of food that the currents sweep away from their partner's mouth when he eats. In exchange, the crab's passengers make sure that no octopus attacks him from behind. An octopus's hard beak is easily able to perforate crab shells, whether their own or borrowed. But this octopus species is also poisonous. It's considered one of the 3 most venomous animals on the planet: the blue-ringed octopus. This tiny Australian octopus also maintains a symbiotic relationship. It has associated itself with some awful bacteria that live in its saliva. And whoever it bites never lives to tell the tale. The tiny pom-pom crab has a thinner exoskeleton, one that's certainly not octopus-proof. In fact, the pom-pom crab is just the right size for a blue-ringed octopus to munch on. But luckily for this diminutive crustacean, its defense isn't based solely on the hardness of its shell. The pom-pom crab has 2 good allies. It carries a mini anemone on each of its claws. The anemones may be tiny, yes, but they can really sting, and especially such naked skin as an octopus's. Its gaudy coloring and striped pattern ought to be a clear enough signal that, in spite of its small size, the pom-pom crab is dangerous. But this octopus is hungry and wants to check out what it's seeing up close. It's an adult octopus and has almost certainly already had some previous experience with pom-pom crabs, but it wants to be sure it's not passing up a good dinner by mistake. The crab notes that the octopus is doubting whether to attack it or not, so it decides it's time to convince him to back off. The way it moves its pincers clearly show what they're holding. The octopus gets the message. He'll look for another prey. The crab has saved its life from a fearsome enemy, and it may not be the first time that it's had good reason to be thankful for the symbiosis that it has established with the little anemones. Left in peace, now it can eat. And the anemones do too. Perhaps the perfect symbiosis, the most intimate one, is that in which you can't distinguish the two symbionts or symbiotic partners. The two are so unified that they seem like one being. A lichen, for example, isn't really a living being, although we always thought it was. Now we know that a lichen is two beings, an alga and a fungus. But they live one inside the other, forming a dual life strategy that acquires a new shape, the product of the union of the two. The fungus receives food thanks to the photosynthesis carried out by the alga. And the alga, in exchange, is protected from dehydration thanks to the water that the fungus retains. The alga has water, and the fungus gets food, even in very extreme ecosystems where neither of them could survive on their own without the other. Reproduction usually involves both beings together too. Although obviously there's no sex, but rather fragmentation. The lichen forms tiny portions that include both alga and fungus, and the wind or the rain take charge of spreading them. The countless relationships among different animals are surprising, perplexing, marvelous, and indispensable for the overall equilibrium of the system. This is very clearly observed in nature when someone dies, because then someone else survives thanks to that death. Even death generates new opportunities, and so forms part of life. A fox is the first to detect the scent of a red deer. Each animal that attends this banquet will contribute, according to its ability to tear the skin or even break the bones, opportunities for the others who may come after. This magpie, for example, can't pull off its piece of meat until the fox has torn through the tough hide first. So the bird will have to wait. Although the fox will have to work fast, as vultures are already gathering over the corpse, and when they dive down on it, they won't leave much for the rest. Vultures, although they may not leave much for others, play an essential hygienic role for all the other inhabitants of the ecosystem. The death of this old tree allows mushrooms to colonize its trunk without putting up a fight any longer. Now, from a greater height, the mushroom spores can fly farther, and their chances to flourish are greater, collaborating with the roots of other trees like this one. The lives of all living beings are interconnected. Symbiosis and parasitism are beneficial for the whole, as long as balance is maintained.